Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Well, welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. I am super excited to learn from our guest today. He is a writer, thinker, keynote speaker whose work has bridged human behavior, technology, and business. He has a background as a chemical engineer and a master's in quantum dynamics, which brings a unique scientific lens to the topics like marketing, decision-making, social networks, and health. His writing explores how people change, how ideas spread, how technology influences everything from our culture to our well-being. And the recent author of Built to Last, which is behind it today. Please welcome David Amerland. David, welcome to our show.
Greg, thank you very much for having me here. I'm actually excited to see where this conversation takes us.
Yeah, I am as well. And as you know, I love talking about endurance and the endurance mindset. So David, how has your endurance mindset impacted your life unexpectedly?
Well, like most people, I developed mine organically, and then I had to develop it further as I delved deeper into me. And what I mean by that is most of us, almost everyone, is the product of our environment. We basically react to the external forces that act upon us, and then we try to manage the stress levels we have as a result of that, try to manage our own expectations. When things don't work out and we get a little bit of headspace, we try to go in internally and sort of discover why it didn't happen, why certain things did go according to plan. So that's my journey. I mean, I did the same thing, and because of my scientific background, I tend to see a lot of people because I used to consult for Fortune 500 companies. So I'd see people in different countries, in different roles, in different sort of positions of power and authority. And what fascinated me always is that human dynamic, how we operate within certain contexts. What are the similarities? What are the differences? What can we learn from those differences that occur and the similarities we notice?
So taking that a step further, and as it applies to you, how have you sort of, as you've learned the science and then sort of I assume you're the first guinea pig, right, of theories and thoughts, like walk us through something that you sort of discovered in yourself and then saw in other people.
Okay, so the first thing we notice, especially when it comes to high performers, is that they have this uncanny ability almost to find a path through a particular problem and make it work regardless of the resources they have. So people who succeed usually, they don't tend to have abundant resources, even if from our perspective, they already start at an elevated position. The challenges are always the challenges. The difficulties are always the difficulties. You are always a person who has to make the decisions that will make things work. And that doesn't change as a calculus. So when it came to me, I, like everybody else, I sort of stumbled, fell, got up, and tried to understand why this happened so that I could learn from it. And what I noticed in myself always was that there were two elements that I used to get wrong. The first thing is how I used to approach any kind of problem from a global perspective, and I'll explain what that means in a second. And the second thing is that I was always focused on scarcity as opposed to the tools at my disposal. So that's an easy one to understand. I always focus on the things I didn't have. I didn't have this, so I couldn't do something. Or I didn't have that. Or some things weren't helping me, so I felt I didn't have the help I needed. And I had to overcome that organically. Now, these two things are linked always. So let's go back to the global perspective. When we approach things with a particular mindset, the way we approach them changes the way we process the signals that we receive from the problem we see, the problem that is acting upon us, the external world, essentially. That processing is actually key to how we then go forward in the performance that we'll actually achieve. And I will explain that in a bit more detail now. Let's say we face a problem that's, from our perspective, intractable. It is really difficult. It is really critical. It may be career defining. It may be potentially life threatening. Different contexts, different situations, same sort of people doing it. Okay, we're all the same biochemical and neurobiological units. If we face a problem, we think this is impossible. This is what happens inside us. We feel, understandably, anxiety, which is there to begin with because the problem is stressing us. We feel a certain degree of panic. Neurochemically, our bloodstream changes, cortisol levels are elevated. Cortisol has a whole lot of impact in our energy system and how that is managed. And our brain, which is there, it's designed to help us survive, interprets all this once it reaches a particularly critical threshold as panic. So now it sees it as a potential threat. Now, the brain has a system to help us survive, but that system is really very old. It's 10,000 years old. So when it comes to the modern world, it senses a threat, it goes into overdrive, it begins to shut down the higher centers of the brain which carry out analytical thinking because they're energetically expensive. It pumps everything it can into our critical organs, our muscles, preparing us for action, which we can't take because we live in a modern world. We're not going to go out and fight. We're not going to go out and, run for our lives or anything like that. So we are faced with a problem. We don't have access to the critical thinking power that we need, and that problem seems insoluble. And then we begin to panic even more. So by taking a step back sometimes and lowering those physiological responses, we enable the brain to kick in, and we're able to think critically and analytically. And then we can see, using exactly the same facts on the ground that we saw before, we can see solutions that weren't available to us in the first instance. The classic instruction, sleep on a problem, it's exactly that. It's gain a little bit of space, gain a bit of perspective. And what that means at a physiological level is you gain the time necessary through sleep, which is essentially repair and building, to allow your brain and your body to reach back down into baseline levels of physiological arousal. And then you begin to see the problem differently because you've gained that space.
Yeah. I love where this conversation is going because, sleep and recovery continue to be a theme, especially on this show. And so I want to dive in a little bit deeper on that, David. Like, we're running into a challenge, you're running into a problem, you think it's too difficult. Obviously, you just don't run to your bedroom and lay down and fall asleep. Like, is there sort of like a preparation or when can we sort of identify the fact that, hey, I'm having this impulse, this reaction to a challenge that really needs me to step back a little bit further? Like, help me understand how to sort of internalize and identify that, hey, this just needs a step back and some recovery, and then walk me through that process.
Yes. Okay, that's a great question. Absolutely brilliant. Because obviously, in most situations where we face a problem, we have to think on our feet. We don't have the luxury of saying, hey, you know what, guys, I'm going to go home and get a couple of hours sleep. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, this doesn't work, right? And, in not my previous book, but the one before, I actually had the pleasure of and the honor of interviewing elite combatants. And they face situations like that in a life and death situation where everything is out of their control and they still have to find solutions. And this is what they do. And this comes directly from their experience. I've sort of formalized it a little bit in terms of rules. The first thing is identify. You know that you're facing an issue because your breath is short, your chest is constricted, your pulse is high, and your head sometimes feels like it's about to explode because you're trying to think hard and the resources are not there. The centers which you need, centers of the brain, which you need to carry out the analytical thinking, are simply shut down for you. So you need to take that proverbial step back. What you do is you take deep breaths, a couple of deep breaths. That activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is designed to bring us back down to baseline. So we'll begin to breathe a little bit more deeply, oxygenate our lungs, oxygenate our brain. Bloodstream gets a bit more oxygen. We relax our muscles. And then suddenly our thinking is a little bit more creative. It's a little bit more analytical. And we can begin to see pathways available to us. We can actually try mentally and sometimes physically solutions which will take us to the outcome we expect, even though the problem itself seemed insoluble. So that's the process straight from those arenas where people have to operate at a very, very high level. And it's the same with a CEO of a company or a military leader in the middle of a battle. You're facing something which you need to solve. And the first reaction is a human one, where you panic. The second one is a trained reaction of a person who's aware, who's intelligent, who knows how to manage their own operating system, where you basically bring everything back down and your brain kicks in. It's some brain power that makes us so unique.
That's super useful. Do you have a favorite breathing technique
Yes,
that you recommend to people that?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's so simple and it's magical almost. This is what you do. If you want to completely decompress, you're feeling stressed and you're aware of it, you need to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So it's called the double sigh technique. Elite special forces guys use it sometimes to decompress in battle. What you do is you take a deep breath through your nose, fill up your lungs, your diaphragm relaxes, fill up your completely until you have no space in you. You hold that for 2 seconds and then you take one tiny little bit more. So it's trying to fit in that extra bit. You hold that for another 3 to 4 seconds and then slowly exhale through the mouth. Now, two things happen immediately. Your blood pressure goes down. Your heartbeat begins to slow down. You kind of feel your brain thinking more clearly. And there's another element which we only found out relatively recently through fMRI studies. When you take that initial first breath, the brainstem, one of the oldest parts of the brain, actually moves by 5 centimeters, which is magical. We don't get to feel it because we don't have sensory input from that area of our body. But if we've been really stressed, we kind of feel the relief from the pressure in our head. And that's part of that movement of decompression.
I'm going to try that later on today. I'm curious also around athletics and elite athletes. And on this same topic, breath work, identifying the problem, elite combat. Let's say we're in the middle of a competition, an Ironman, for
Yes.
example, and we're 7 hours into a 14-hour day. How can some of these techniques and approaches sort of help us with our overall stress levels of the day, the performance, et cetera?
Well, everything that we do at a physical level has a correlative value and a correlative action and a mental one. And the brain ultimately drives everything forward. It drives us forward through using different pathways. One of it is perception. A lot of the times when we reach fatigue point, for instance, as you said, in a 7-hour Ironman competition, the perceptual fatigue point is always different to the actual fatigue point. What we react is the perceptual fatigue point because it's there to protect us from ourselves so we don't harm ourselves. When we want to exceed that point, we then need to recalibrate. And this is how we do it. We do it by focusing on other things. We do it by focusing internally, perhaps, on different imagery. I'll give you an example of straight out of athletics from Usain Bolt. Now, there are countless videos on social media which show Usain Bolt before a competition where his title is on the line, the fastest man in the world label is on the line, and all the competitors are lined up on their blocks, they're checking their shoes, they're checking their blocks. And what does he do? He walks over to the person who's handing out water bottles, takes a water bottle, takes a sip, fist bumps and touches them. They smile. He gives them the water bottle back, says something to them. They smile back, and he goes back. Now, what has he done? Because this is, he's friendly, obviously, but this is also his process. What he's done, it is activated either by design or by instinct. This mimicry we have in our brain with a mirror neuron network. When we interact with another person, we basically begin to mimic their stance, if you like, and our brain begins to form the same neural signature as they have. So he's joking, but what he's done is just relaxing. So he goes on the blocks now, and he's totally relaxed. He knows what's on the line, but this is his process on how to relax and flow into it. Because if he started out from a stress position, even though the race is very short, less than 10 seconds in his case, if he had elevated heartbeat already, he has less margin to start off with because he's already starting from a high position of activation physically, so he can't rev too high. If he had high blood pressure, same thing. If he had too much stress and anxiety in his body, same thing. And all those things, let's not forget, actually burn ATP, they burn adenosine triphosphate, the fuel that the muscles burn. So if you're burning all those things because you're stressed and you're worried and you're anxious, you have commensurably a little bit less to give in that sort of unforgiving race, which is 100 meters. You have less than 10 seconds. So there's no point in the very little, zero margin to recover from an error. So you need to be at your absolutely best. And that's how he did it. So that's a technique we can apply. Classic example, and I've had this also from elite combatants. In the middle of a battle, they touch the shoulder of one of their comrades and they crack a joke. And it sounds like they're sort of really badass, but they're not. All they're doing is having that human connection that helps them to decompress and recalibrate. So the stress of battle and everything that goes with it, which is absolutely, incredible to think about from our perspective, doesn't actually impair their function.
That's fantastic. I'm just trying to apply. So I do triathlons, and I'm thinking of a day, right? I'm in the middle of the bike ride, and to your point about fatigue starting to kick in and some negative thoughts. And I find, and this is really echoing your point, like if I start thinking about my family or another human connection, it's sort of, or them being at the finish line, right? You start sort of changing your mindset and changing your perspective of how the day's going. Granted, I still got to do some very technical things, and especially if you're in a pack or picking up nutrition or whichever. But I think just echoing your point, by having those resources sort of at your ready, right? This is what I'm going to think about when I feel or notice X. Can you talk to a little bit more about that? Am I making the right connection
Yes,
there?
you are, and you're basically using a number of techniques. One is imagery, where you are thinking about something else, and what happens when you think about something else? The brain has to actually create that image for us, and not only does it create a visual image, but depending on what you think about, it tends to be auditory as well, and it has to also have some scent with it, depending on how. And in order to do that, it has to use up resources. Those resources require what we call an attentional blink in psychology. They take our attention away from our internal world where we're suffering because we're doing something physically punishing and it's pushing us. And we're putting the other attention somewhere else. And the brain dumps down the signal we're getting from our body that tells us, oh, this is hurting, or I'm tired. Oh, you better stop now because you can't go any further. So that's one of it, one of those techniques. The other technique is to create accountability, to use the external world in terms of expectations to push you through because you don't want to let somebody else down. And again, ultramarathon runners usually do that. They think all the people who will feel let down if they fail. And we are social animals. We are designed to receive, receive expectations from the external world, fashion our own internal model, and then have our performance revolve accordingly around that model, which is what makes us so amazing at creating civilizations and doing incredible things. I was going to say, there's one more technique you can use, however. I don't know if you watched The Matrix in 1998, the first film that came out. There's that scene where Trinity is running from an agent. Agent is invincible. He's designed to kill her and she can't stop it. She jumps across a rooftop, falls down her staircase, is on her back, frozen in fear. And she says to herself, get up, Trinity, speaking in third person. Now, again, this is a psychological stroke concept called distancing, where it's like you become your own cheerleader. And again, in order to do that, you need to create two visual models in your head, which you do it unwittingly and also almost subconsciously. And that kind of diverts resources in the brain between two voices instead of one. So it has the same effect as the imagery. It dampens down what you feel because your brain now is putting resources into creating your cheerleader voice, which tells you, get up, you're better than this, you can do this. And you feel suddenly that you have renewed energy. And all you have is that your attention, or rather the signal was coming in from your body telling you how tired you are, how painful this is, how exhausted you are, is beginning to dump down. So you don't notice it as much.
So how do you develop that cheerleader, right? I mean, it's not something that we kind of turn a switch and that to me seems like there's a lot of sort of mindset work, some solidarity. How can we strengthen that superpower, that cheerleader?
It's done the same way that everybody who has it does it, incrementally, steadily, day at a time. So it's not something which you just switch on when you need it. It's there when you don't need it. It's there when it talks to you when things are going well. It says, you had a good day. That's pretty good. And let's see what went wrong. It's almost like an internal dialogue between two people as opposed to the monologue that you have in your head. Or It's there when you're trying something tricky and you're not sure of yourself, but it's not, a big thing. It's something new, which you're learning. Perhaps it's making you feel stupid, or you're putting something together and it's just not going, like the IKEA flat packs. And so we seem to need a PhD to put together. So, and you say to yourself, well, you got this, you can do this. It can't be that hard. And then you sort of think, yeah, I mean, how difficult can it be? And you have the kind of dialogue. Now, by building it up through those relatively low key situations, it begins to become available to you when you're actually facing a pressure or a situation that's critical.
Well, awesome. Awesome. So I'm going to jump back to the point you made earlier about focus on scarcity, not abundance.
Yes.
That's one of the points that you stumbled upon in your journey. Go into a little bit more detail about what you meant by that.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing it up. Okay, so most of the times when we face a problem, we kind of instantly know what we need in order to solve it. But usually those things which we immediately come light upon in terms of what we need are the things we don't have. So, you're starting your business, what do you need? Inexhaustible cash supplies. You are working in a job, what do you need? Somebody to mentor you and push you through, the process where you're going to get promoted. You are doing something which you don't know and you think, I just don't know this. I'm not smart enough. I don't have it. Right. These are the things we immediately focus on. It's a natural thing in terms of our evolution. We are designed to look at these negative things because they're there to safeguard us from overextending ourselves. And 10,000 years ago, any kind of overextension usually was catastrophic. So we wouldn't pass our genes on. So we all ended up with that negative voice in our head, unfortunately. And this is how we overcome it. Instead of looking at the problem in terms of what we haven't got, we should, and this is what I learned organically from myself, I always thought, what do I have to solve this? This is like those party tricks where you have to get out of a locked room and you only have like a toothpick and a cherry. And you think, these are the tools I have. How can I make these things work for me? And usually I found, and this is also supported by science, supported by research, if we focus on the things which we have, our own ingenuity will show us how to get around the problem. So there's usually no problem that's intractable. It's just that we can't see the solution, and that's what appears to us to be intractable.
You mentioned tools and looking at the tools that we do have. One of my obstacles is actually knowing what tools are out there that I have, right? I'm a very optimistic person, have tons of gratitude in my life. And I think to your point, that has helped me solve problems when they've come in front of me. But sometimes we just don't know that you have access to a friend who's got business skills or you're, I don't know, someone in your community so what I'd like to explore is how can we kind of make ourselves a little bit more aware of the tools and resources that we do have around us?
That's it's a beautiful question. It comes to developing another life skill, which is developing the situational awareness we need in order to function better. And situational awareness in this particular sort of context requires us to know, what do we know? What are we good at? Who do we know? What are they good at? What kind of situations are we good at dealing with? What kind of situations are going to give us problems? So by having that self-knowledge, and this is developed, again, by having that self-awareness, that incremental self-talk that builds us up day after day, by doing this, by implementing this approach, and this works in any context, whether you're an athlete or whether you're a soldier or whether you're a business person, by having that, essentially, you're creating the kind of confidence in your own capability. And then you're telling yourself, okay, some problems are going to be easy for me to solve because I can do them, or I know them, or I've encountered them before. And some problems are going to be hard simply because I haven't encountered them before, so I don't know what's coming up after the initial phases, or they simply require resources I do not have, and now I need to work extra hard to make up for the things I don't have. But every problem is capable of being broken down into sort of steps, which would allow us to see how would we tackle it.
Certainly. I'm curious. It's funny I use that word because that's my question. How does curiosity play into this?
Excellent. Curiosity is a superpower for us. It keeps our brain alive, but more than that, it is one of the fundamental blocks of what we would call the open mindset or a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is exactly that. It's one that accepts that it doesn't matter how perceptually to ourselves good we are or bad we are at something. We are not set in stone. We are a process. We're going to evolve. Even a situation where we have experienced utter failure is part of this growth, which allows us to become better, smarter, learn from that. So curiosity does two things. It helps us develop resources, mental and physical, which sometimes we don't need immediately, but which come in handy at some future point. And secondly, it makes us comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing things, of not being able to do things. And usually that's a stumbling block in itself. People who are good at something or good in life, let's say, they reach a difficulty they haven't encountered before. To them, it's new, that feeling of not being able to get things done or experience things going their way, and it crushes them. And people who have experienced failure before or who are comfortable with feeling that, this is a discomfort zone for me now, and I'm going to get through it. They are better at dealing with this, even though perhaps not as smart or not as resourceful, but they are willing to accept that. It doesn't diminish them, and they push through.
I hate's a strong word, but I don't like when I get that uncomfortable feeling, because I now know that that is an indicator of the direction I'm supposed to be going.
That's for most of us. I totally get what you mean. Back in 2016, when I started writing The Sniper Mind, I clocked up about 300 interview hours with elite combatants. And then I spoke to neuroscientists. And then during the process of writing it, I had to go through 10,000 hours of research. And I'm sort of familiar with how studies work. I've come from a scientific background, but it was new to me at the time. I felt stupid every single day. So I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. Well, speaking of books, David, let's talk about Built to Last.
Ooh.
Who's that book written for? Give us some background. The audience members are curious about it. They should jump onto Amazon or their favorite retailer and grab a copy.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing it up now. It's not your average fitness book. It's not prescriptive. It's designed to be a blueprint. We know from facts, we know from data that most of us want to get fit. We know that we try, especially come New Year, New Year's resolutions. We've been through Christmas, we're pretty relaxed. We're trying to start a new year fresh start. So we do everything we can to actually help ourselves get fitter and stronger. Fitter and stronger, not just physically, but also mentally and psychologically. And also we know from data that by the time we get to around mid-March, end of April, about 65% of us have dropped out. By end of May, about 85% of us have dropped out. We know from the World Health Organization figures that while $1 trillion a year is spent on fitness globally, by 2050, half the world's adult population is going to be overweight or obese. So something doesn't work here. It's not our willpower. It's not our access to information. Podcasts like this one, there's tens of thousands of them. There's a lot of free information. There are a lot of government initiatives. There are the gyms in almost every neighborhood these days. So it's not that. It's something more fundamental. And Built to Last takes us through those stages. What is it that holds us back? What is it we don't understand about ourselves? And how can we make it work once we understand it? So it's a blueprint that's designed to help every individual make fitness a lifelong sort of activity that will help them live a little bit longer, but more importantly, live healthier for most of their life. And that's the most important thing.
So where'd the inspiration come from for the book?
Well, it's a funny story because I wasn't intending to write anything like this. I sort of write slightly more complex books. But what happened was after the pandemic, I got a home gym because I converted one of the rooms in my house to a completely kitted out gym. And I've been training with a friend, and he also has a home gym. So I've been training once a week together. And it's kind of a social thing. If you train with somebody, that attentional blink takes effect. So you go a little bit harder than you would if you're on your own. So we tend to go a little bit harder. But also from a social point of view, it's a pleasant way to spend a couple of hours. So he would come with all these, either an article he saw somewhere about some kind of fad or some kind of myth, and we would explore it, and I'd come back with some studies. And from the conversation over back and forth over a period of 2 years, the seed of Built to Run and Built to Last was actually created.
That's fantastic. I always loved. I published a book many years ago about a turnaround of a business that I took through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process, and I realized that there wasn't a lot of resources out there for the small business owner to understand what that process was, and so that was my motivation to sort of like document what it feels like to be in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process, and it's not all this finger pointing and shame and these other emotions. And so I'm always curious of how other authors get their inspiration. And because at some point, like most of us have books inside us that we just don't have the process or the time or the dedication to get them off the ground. And so I was curious where that came from because
Yeah,
it is different than
absolutely.
your other books.
It is, yeah. Although, I mean, I've written books on search and online marketing and business and trust and decision making and intentionality. But although they're all sort of kind of different, what is the same for me, what drives me always, and what becomes my starting point is us. Why do we behave this way? Why don't we do the things we should be doing? Why do we do things that we should not be doing and we still sort of persist in doing them? So that's what drives me when I sort of go through those things and I try to understand how we operate, why we are the way we are, how we can become better without, however, being making our life difficult. And I mentioned this in Built to Last. I said that if each of us was shadowed every day of our life by a nutritionist, a psychotherapist, and a personal trainer, we'd be perfect human beings. And we don't have those things. So we have somehow to manage to be those beings for us without, however, becoming, our life job times three. It can't be that difficult because life is difficult enough already. So I include a whole lot of tips we can do, little tricks we can try to help us do those things from as energetically and accessible point of view as possible so life doesn't become difficult.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to break into it. And it goes back to part of our conversation we had earlier around curiosity, right?
Yes.
You just said, why are we not doing the things we're supposed to be doing? Or why is this going? Like that constant asking why leads into curiosity, leads into an idea, leads into execution. David, an audience member wants to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You can find me at davidamerland.com. And if you Google my name, all my socials come up. I tend to come across a lot of studies, a lot of stuff which really fascinates me and fires me up. And it does. I put out little insights and little diagrams to help us understand things. So I share broadly and generously. So I always put stuff out there.
Awesome. And how else are you doing like keynotes or workshops? Like what else are you doing sort of these days other than publishing books?
These days, I'm only publishing books and trying to maintain my own health and fitness, which is
Mm.
almost a full-time job. I'm 60 now. So as I get older, it's what you said earlier, I'm my own sort of lab rat. So I try all these things and see how it works, see what I learn about myself first, and then I discuss it with others, share it with friends, look at studies, and see what sort of insights I can pull out that help us.
Well, I much appreciate the fact that you're your own lab rat, and I look forward to benefiting from not having to go through all the steps because you've done that already. David, this conversation could go on forever. I'm really intrigued with our topic. Thank you for being on the show. I really loved when you started talking about we are a process. We're not just here. We're evolving and we're learning and curiosity. And then we dove into the being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Um, what a great conversation. Audience members, if you got some value out of today's show, please subscribe. Please follow David. Go check out his website. Go grab his book. He's giving a tremendous amount of resources to us through his own hard work. So, again, David, it's been super having you on the show.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefinduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits